Fox News Sunday, and I understand that the president is just about, is this 10 o'clock Central where he's going to be speaking?
Yes.
That he's
10 o'clock Central, yeah.
Yeah.
So not for another hour and 20 minutes.
All right. So what do you think? Is this going to be just addressing the shooting, or what is it going to be? Do you know?
I think it's going to be addressing the shooting. No, you can't talk about anything else. I mean, if people are wondering, is he going to talk about domestic violence or Rob Porter? No. Nobody's told me that, but I know it. You know, you don't mix that up when
right.
you're talking about 17 souls that have. This is just awful. I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
As somebody, and I know you're very pro-gun rights, what do you think we should do?
Well, I had explained earlier that it's a longer. I don't know what laws could be created or whether laws were just simply not enforced. So I don't know enough to say what we should do. Especially, you just mentioned guns. I'm not even sure that would be part of the solution. I don't know. I know there are a lot of different components in this individual's life, including severe disciplinary problems at the school, potentially mental problems as well. He was essentially homeless, living with a friend of his because his mom passed away in November. So there could be all kinds of different components related to it. So I really don't know. I had a more a longer-term solution because I think that our society, because one of the things that popped out at me, Chris, was the fact that very few people, they knew he was strange, they knew something was wrong, but it didn't really stand out as a threat. And I was maintaining that the reason for that is that our society, whether it be through our television shows, our movies, our video games, music, beyond that, tolerates levels of creepiness that at such a high level that people just don't stand out anymore. People just, you're looking at somebody and you're going, oh, well, I see a guy like that on TV, or I see people like that on Instagram all the time. Because, people are showing these Instagram photos of this guy. I bet you go to Instagram, there are probably 200 of these 3,000 students. They probably have the same pictures on there. So
I was going to say, this idea, well, he was brandishing guns on Instagram. How many thousands or millions of young people do we think around the country, have stuff like that? And that's the limit of how far they're going to go. They want to express their disaffection or their anger, and they do it by a picture, and it means no more than that. And if you're going to start saying, well, anybody that posts a picture that's vaguely threatening or even says something, now we're talking about, I know everybody talks about the Second Amendment, now we're talking about the First Amendment, that don't have a right to free speech. I mean, it's one thing if you sit there and say, I'm going to plug Jamie Ullman. That obviously is a threat and has legal repercussions. But if you sit there and say, I'm mad at the world, I'm not sure that there's a legal response you can have to that.
Yeah, and we'll find out. I mean, let's see. He was 19 years old, and so and he clearly had a lot of guns. So I don't know what if people are looking for some solution that's related to guns or gun laws. I think we need to wait and find out what exactly was going on here, and whether it just was a lack of an enforcement issue, or it was him illegally obtaining them, or legally obtaining them. I don't know.
Apparently, he had legally obtained at least the gun. I hesitate to say it because I know that most of your audience is going to be against me on this. And you and I have talked about this issue because, frankly, we've been through these kinds of events before. I just find it, because I'm not talking just about this one case. I mean, I'm talking about the fact that, and you can argue about whether the number is precise or not, that there have been 18 school-related shootings so far this year, and there have been 270 in the last, I think, since Columbine, 270. Now, some of them are different than others, and I understand that. But there does seem to be a problem here, which is that kids take guns into schools. And while I fully understand, and look, kids, grown-ups take guns, and look what happened in Las Vegas, I just feel like we're failing to give any answer. Nothing is going to be foolproof. Nothing is going to stop every case. And this is why, to a certain degree, I don't think it matters the details of this case as opposed to others. But, I was thinking, last October, when Stephen Paddock shot up and killed, how many people was that? 40, 50 people in Las Vegas. and everybody talked about bump stocks and the idea that bump stocks, this is something that does no good for anybody. It's just the NRI had expressed concerns about it and all of that. You know what's happened to bump stocks? Nothing. The ATF put out a regulation. A lot of pro-gun people have filed because you have an opportunity for public comment. I think 36,000 people have filed saying don't regulate bump stocks. I mean, even something like bump stocks, we've done nothing about. And I fully understand the right to bear arms. And look, that was decided by the Supreme Court in 2008. But I had a fascinating conversation, an interview, which I'm sure I'm going to play some of on Sunday, with Antonin Scalia, who wrote the Gun Rights, the Heller decision back in 2008. And he talked at the time about that while the right to bear arms is part of the Constitution and inviolable, that limitations on that right, or limitations based on the idea of some regulations, that he did not think was unconstitutional. He thought that, for instance, he said it says right to bear arms, so a cannon is not something you can bear. So he thought that even by the standards of the 1780s or 90s, that the idea that you could just carry a cannon down the middle of Main Street should be something that governments should be able to regulate. I just find it hard that there's nothing that we feel we can or are able to do for political and for principled reasons.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Is this? But have we determined that this is a gun issue?
Well, how did those guys didn't die by slingshots? I mean,
right.
We're talking again. I'm not talking about this particular case in detail. I'm talking about. I don't know. It bothers me that a young man, a disturbed young man, and I understand there's a mental health component here too. It bothers me the young man. If he has a handgun, I can understand. If he has a shotgun for hunting, I can understand that. And yes, you could kill people with both of those. The idea that a guy has an AR-15 and, according to the sheriff, countless high-capacity magazines, I don't understand that.
Yeah, well, I guess, and at some point, though, and I go back, I mean, I think sometimes we think that a gun law might be an easier fix, but I honestly believe that what happened here with this school is reflective of a much deeper problem in our society, and I think these kids, first of all, we are a culture of death. We laud it, we applaud it, we pay to see it. And I think that creates an environment where there's really not much of a value on life. I
don't agree with that. I mean, look, I certainly agree that there are a lot of things that are twisted, but come on, Jamie. I mean, most people lead their lives in very honorable ways. Millions of people every week go to church and pray and give money to charity,
and they have AR-15s.
We don't have a culture of death, and
right?
That's not fair.
But they have. But those people you just talked about, a lot of them have AR-15s too, and they're not shooting people.
Well, I understand, but some people are, and I just don't. I guess I don't know why we make it so easy. I mean, I fully understand it. That it's settled law. People have a right to bear arms, but these weapons of mass destruction, and that's what they are when you have a 50 or 100 round capacity magazine. I don't understand.
But if you look at it,
why do people need that? I mean, look, if what you're saying is that this isn't going to solve everything, of course it isn't. And yes, you have all those things, but to sit there and say, well, we're going to need a societal change and we need to change our culture. I mean, how many kids are going to get killed while we're trying to change our culture? Well,
yeah, and how many kids are going to get killed while we sit there and talk about changing gun laws when they're going to get a hold of guns one way or the other? They do right now. I mean, look at the carnage we see on a regular basis on a weekend in the city of Chicago.
But wait a minute. We're not this kid, and you're certainly right. But this kid is not not a member of the Blood or the Crips in Chicago. That's a different deal, and I agree. We got to deal with that. And I know all the look. Here's the terrible thing. I could argue your case as well as you can, and you could argue my case as well as I can.
Yeah.
Because frankly, we both have heard all of this ad nauseum. And yes, I understand Chicago has some of the toughest gun laws, and there's carnage every week. And I'm not in any way saying all of that. I just wish this seems to be, and I'm not saying it's the only thing. I think clearly the mental health laws. This kid was a troubled kid. You know, how many troubled kids are there out there, though, as you say? I mean, how many people have posted threatening pictures on Instagram or Snapchat or whatever that, you know, you can't round them all up. But explain one thing to me. As a gun advocate, why do you need 100-round magazines?
To protect me from my government.
You don't think a 5-round magazine or a 10-round magazine would be enough?
They've got bigger guns than I do.
Well, you know what? They're always going to have bigger guns than you do.
Right. But here, let me tell you this, because we're getting kind of we're doing the same debate on the gun thing. But let me ask you this. So for instance, I'll make an analogy. There are people out there who erroneously believe that that terrorism is a Muslim thing, right? And that Muslims are, they say, well, it just so happens not all Muslims are terrorists, but all terrorists seems to be Muslims. But if that were the case, if Islam were a terribly violent religion and a murderous religion, we have upwards of 6 million Muslims in this country. If it were true that the Islamic faith is, as some people say, is violent, whatever, we'd have people dying all the time at the hands of Muslims, and we don't. And I'll transfer that then to the AR-15, for instance. If AR-15s were really the problem, I'm telling you, I don't know how many millions of people own one, but if they were really the problem, we'd have death constantly on our streets.
I didn't say the AR-15s. I talked about
whatever.
I was talking about the magazines.
Okay,
which bother me.
Yeah, well, and I think interestingly enough, the NRA actually has been, to a certain degree, even when it came to background checks, national background checks. It was too bad because at the time when President Obama and the Democrats wanted to pass gun legislation in the wake of Sandy Hook, the NRA supported a national background check, but what happened is they wanted more. They wanted to ban this and ban that and cut the manufacturing and that. And at that point, then the legislation failed. So I think that there have been reasonable discussions had within the NRA community and beyond regarding high capacity magazines, even the bump stock.
We need to have them again. I mean, the fact that, and I'm not disputing that the Democrats have overreached in a lot of these cases. I mean, I hope folks that are listening to me, and I'm sure some of them are grinding their teeth. I am not saying that we should take away guns. We've had a constitutional decision by the Supreme Court. The right to bear arms is as modern today as it was back when the founders wrote it. And I agree with that. That's settled law. But the question is, and even the proponent, the author of the decision, Antonin Scalia, said, and obviously he would have drawn the line differently than maybe I would have. But at least he did say that it's not just like the First Amendment. If you fire in a crowded theater, that there's a limit. You can be arrested for that because there's a danger that the Second Amendment doesn't overweigh everything.
I do think that we run a danger in suddenly then making the entire discussion about this shooting all about guns. Because
you didn't. I mean, I didn't say that.
No, I know. I don't.
Right. I don't think that. I mean, this kid. I don't know how you do it though, because this kid was obviously an accident waiting to happen. He had terrible mental issues. He had, he had disciplinary. He'd been kicked out of the school. His father had died 5 years ago from a heart attack. His mother died from pneumonia.
Yeah.
You say he was living with the family of a friend. I mean, this sounds like an accident waiting to happen.
Yeah.
So I agree. There are lots of, but on the other hand, how do you solve that? I mean, how many kids are there like that?
I happen to believe, though, and I think President Trump will probably address this today at some point when he speaks regarding our mental health system, because I think if you talk to a lot of people regarding their attempts to get help for people and our mental health system, I think it's really torn up. And I think I'm pretty much guarantee you the president who has discussed this before will probably discuss it again.
No, I agree. And just to be clear, I think all of those things are fair game and should be discussed.
Yeah.
And but I think guns do need to be, if not guns, magazines need to be. I just hate the idea that people are loaded. And I understand your argument, and I'm not discrediting that. I understand a lot of very patriotic Americans feel that way. I hate the idea that this kid could be loaded in a way that he's in the position to kill dozens, if not, I mean, he shot 31 people.
Yeah. Yeah, I do believe I'm with you on the idea that we shouldn't just simply shut down all discussions of the issue. So I'm just saying that there's a lot on the table here, and I know you'll be tackling it by Sunday because a lot will change.
And one of our guests, we're going to have the king. You're the prince of conservative talk radio. We're going to have the king of conservative talk radio, Rush Limbaugh, on the show for our annual conversation. I'm sure he's going to have something very interesting to say about this. I can't wait to hear.
No doubt. I think you've talked to him before too, and he's always good on your show.
He almost never does TV interviews, and we do about one a year. And I've got to say, he's a friend, and I'm very respectful of him. And the one thing, though, is because he talks for 3 hours a day, he tends to go on at length. And so and the first time I would interrupt just because I wanted to get to another subject, and his listeners went nuts, and I said, Wallace, why don't you just shut up and listen? So now he gives a papal dispensation. He says, folks, I've got, this is what quoting him, not me, I got diarrhea at the mouth, and Chris is sitting there, and it's okay, don't get mad at him if he wants to move on to another subject.
Well, I'm honored you called me a prince, though. Yes, you are a prince. I appreciate that, and we will see you as the king of the Sunday talk shows. We'll see you on Sunday.
Thank you, my